Curiosity killed the cat, but satisfaction brought it back. It's a compelling spin. Everyone's heard curiosity killed the cat. It means don't look into things that aren't your business or you might regret it, or a blunt interpretation might be it's bad to be curious, it's bad to pursue knowledge. And that interpretation makes the adage sound a bit unfriendly. So then someone comes along and says, actually, the real version of the phrase is curiosity killed the cat, but satisfaction brought it back. Completely different implication. If you satiate your curiosity, you won't regret it after all. Of course, dying and coming back to life doesn't really make that much sense. Like, are we supposed to read it as you'll regret curiosity no matter what, but if you get an answer you like, you'll stop regretting it? But who am I to argue with the real version of the phrase? It is the real version, isn't it? I mean, it rhymes. It's in trochaic tetrameter, catalectic, with mild elision. Well, as it turns out, the earliest known version from the 1598 play Every Man in His Humor goes care'll kill a cat, where care means worry or sorrow. It was in 1868 that the phrase, they say curiosity killed a cat once, popped up in an Irish news article. It's not known how, when, or why care became curiosity, no mention of satisfaction though. In 1905, a Texas newspaper said curiosity killed a cat, but it came back. 7 years later, a Pennsylvania paper said satisfaction brought it back. So this can't be called the original version. It's a spin on a phrase that had been around for decades, if not centuries. It's a retort, a rebuttal. So why has it gained a reputation as the real version? Well, this seems to happen a lot. All over the internet, there's a slew of posts and articles saying that various phrases you know are actually the short version. Even in real life, I've been told outright that satisfaction brought it back is the true version. So why does this happen? What's the mindset? I think that to unravel that, we need to look at a few more examples, see where they originate, why each one stands out. Hi, I'm a curious cat, but you can call me Indigo. Let me share my findings. Jack of all trades, master of none, yet oftentimes better than a master of one. It would be understandable to find distaste in the first half. Jack of all trades, master of none comes off as a critique of dilettantism, that is, dabbling in many fields and interests without committing to any. It implies that it's undesirable to be just okay at several things without being really good at any. Better than a master of one flips it around. Someone who is okay at doing a lot of things can get more done than someone who excels at doing one thing. But the phrase didn't even originally have master of none in it. Jack is a shorthand for everyman, especially the working class, hence lumberjack, the jacks in fairy tales, even playing cards. When jack of all trades popped up in the early 1600s, it was technically neutral but would often be used derisively. The explicitly negative add-ons started popping up in the 1700s. As early as 1721 we have jack of all trades and it would seem good at none. Master of none seems to have first been used in 1785 by Irish politician Charles Lucas. The oftentimes better edition only seems to have popped up within the last decade. There are no sources for this earlier than this century. Plenty of articles claim it's the original version, but no citation on that one. But it has the word oftentimes in it. Doesn't that make it sound old and fancy? Great minds think alike, but fools seldom differ. See, in my experience, great minds think alike is not so much a grand maxim that you should aspire to live by as an offhand remark on two people having the same idea. Like an observation, you know? Oh, we're getting dinner together and we both want burgers. What a funny coincidence. Haha, great minds think alike. Fools seldom differ is like a jab at the core phrase. Just because you agree doesn't mean you're both right. As early as the 1600s, there was the phrase good wits jump or great wits jump, where jump in this case means agree. By the 1800s, wits became minds and jump became think alike. It's hard to get an origin for fools seldom differ, but the 1977 Dictionary of Catchphrases makes it pretty clear that it's the way an unimpressed listener might retort. In other words, not part of the core phrase. Birds of a feather flock together until the cat comes. Birds of a feather is as straightforward as it gets. People get along when they have common ground. Until the cat comes, these bonds will fall apart under pressure. Maybe it's implying that like-mindedness alone is not enough to foster real unity that can handle pressure. Or maybe it's saying that self-preservation will always overtake the pack instinct. This one dates back over 2,000 years. An early version appeared in the Book of Sirach, translated from Hebrew as birds resort unto their like, so truth will return to them that practice notice her. So the original version is moralistic, love thy neighbor, truth is a bird that will fly with you if you are truthful. In 1545, we get birds of one kind and color flock and fly always together. 50 years later, birds of a feather will flock together. Until the cat comes appears to be a construction of the internet. No record of origin, no source earlier than the 2010s. Some people take birds of a feather as advocating division, separation along superficial lines, but I think that that's deliberately trying to find fault. I always saw it as an observation about people gravitating towards similar personalities, not a set of instructions. The early bird catches the worm, but the second mouse gets the cheese. The early bird phrase is about how it's best to not wait around, to not miss your chance. There's also an angle of competition, only one worm, only one bird can get it. The second mouse gets the cheese inverts it with jarring imagery. The first mouse who comes to a mousetrap dies. Now the phrase is about being cautious, not rushing in, or maybe it's about waiting for somebody else to set off a landmine. The proverb dates back to at least the 1600s, centuries before spring-loaded mousetraps were invented. The second mouse extension apparently originated on web forums in the 90s. As a joke. How would you put this into practice anyway? How do you distinguish worms from cheese? Can these two ideas even be applied to comparable scenarios? My country, right or wrong, if right to be kept right, if wrong to be set right. This pertains to a more serious matter. My country, right or wrong, implies that patriotism comes above all else. You should stick with your country, even if it's in the wrong. The extended version implies responsibility on the part of the speaker to keep the country on the right track. The line was originally spoken by Stephen Decatur. It was over 50 years later that Carl Schurz said the line as it is here. So if you're quoting Schurz, yeah, the full version is correct. But he wasn't the first person to use the shortened phrase. But it's hardly as if the first version has to be the correct version. Rome wasn't built in a day, but it burned in one. Rome wasn't built in a day. Classic dad line for renovation and pulled pork. You can't get everything done quickly, but it burned in one. Destruction is far quicker than creation. This one might be the stupidest of all of these. The extended line is not a contradiction of the shorter one. It's not a counterpoint. When someone's creating something and it's going slowly, what would they gain from hearing, don't forget, what you're creating could be destroyed quickly? It just makes the meaning opaque. How would you use this? Is it a warning? Hey, I just want to make sure you know, that pork you're slow cooking, I could throw it all in the trash right now if I felt like it. And what's the burning even referring to? If it's about the Great Fire of Rome, that lasted over a week and it didn't even wipe the city out. If it's about the collapse of the Roman Empire, well, that was complex as hell and it took centuries. Maybe I'm being pedantic, I just can't see the point. This line sounds like it came from a third-rate comedian's cutting room. The idiom goes back to 12th century France. In the 1500s, John Haywood was the first to write it down in English in his book, A Dialogue Containing the Number in Effect of All the Proverbs in the English Tongue. Jesus, John, you couldn't have pared that one back a little? The extended line has no source, it just popped up on the internet. I've seen the long version attributed to John Haywood, which is insane to me. Like, you can go look up what he wrote and see it for yourself. Like, did somebody just believe that the burned down version was the original and Google enough to find out that Haywood was the first person to write Rome was not built in one day in English, and then just assume that he also wrote the fucking punchline for it without bothering to check? Do you think this 16th century poet was doing his writing in the fucking SNL break room? Ignorance is bliss versus where ignorance is bliss, 'tis folly to be wise. Ignorance is bliss says if you don't know something, you don't worry about it. This is commonly applied as both a positive, I'll be peaceful if I don't know, and a negative, you wouldn't be peaceful if you understood. There's a whole Gwyneth Paltrow movie about this. The full line is definitively positive. If knowing something would make you unhappy, you don't need to know it. Now, this one's interesting because that actually is the full line. It's from an 18th century poem, Ode on a Distant Prospect of Eton College by Thomas Gray. Eton College is a boarding school in England, and Gray is recalling what he felt in his time there as a child, unaware of the daunting future. He thinks about the current students and everything they don't know about the world, how strange it is to think that they're having fun, ignorant of the trials that await, before concluding that children would have nothing to gain from knowing those trials too early. So it's a little ironic. Yes, ignorance is bliss is not the full phrase, but even the full phrase is divorced of the context of the poem. That kids will need to face difficult things eventually, it's just useless to make them face them before they need to. Money is the root of all evil versus the love of money is the root of all evil. The technical difference is whether it's the existence of money or people's attitude toward it that causes problems. I'm not letting my lefty brain push me off topic, but anytime I've seen money is the root of all evil, it's always been using money as a synecdoche for greed anyway, so it kind of feels like hair splitting. This is a Bible quote, and it's true that the King James Version renders it as the love of money is the root of all evil. If you go back to Greek though, a more accurate translation would be the love of money is a root of all the evils. Note that it's a root, a possible root. Greed can motivate any kind of wrongdoing, not that it's the only possible motivator. It's just interesting to me. Next is a phrase I use often. Have your cake and eat it too. Or eat your cake and have it too. This one's really silly. It gets grouped in with all these others as a misused idiom when the only assertion is that a few words should be the other way around for clarity's sake. The meaning is still the same either way. You can't eat something and keep it. You can't do two things that contradict each other. The earliest recorded use is from 1538. A man cannot have his cake and eat his cake. A decade later, we get John Haywood's word salad book where he lists it as a man cannot eat his cake and have it still. As far as records indicate, have before eat appears to predate or be contemporary to eat before have, although the latter was more popular in writing prior to the early 20th century. I don't think the order really makes a difference. There's probably two things that cause confusion. First, the assumption that the phrase is describing a linear timeline. You can have a cake and then eat it, but the phrase isn't describing a sequence, it's describing two things that you cannot do at once. And second is the shift in the word have, because over the 20th century there was a precipitous increase in using have to mean eat or partake. Honestly, have your cake versus eat your cake is just the most unimportant thing on this list of unimportant things. Absence makes the heart grow fonder, but too much absence makes it wander. This one is straightforward. You feel strongly about people when you're away from them, but if you're away too long, you lose interest. Absence makes the heart grow fonder originates in a song from the 1800s by Thomas Bailey called Isle of Beauty. Predictably, too much absence makes it wander has no apparent source. This one's just really weird because sure, being estranged for extended periods will be taxing for a relationship, that's to be expected. But why attach this to that phrase? Is it interpreting absence makes the heart grow fonder as an instruction? Like you should avoid your loved ones to make them like you more rather than as a simple observation that being away from someone makes you miss them? Or is it recognizing that it is an observation and nitpicking its lack of universality? So there's one more, the big one. You knew this one was coming. Blood is thicker than water versus the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. So blood is thicker than water has a pretty clear implication. Blood relation is always more important than friendship, and it's understandably frustrating to hear this. Plenty of people have every right to want nothing to do with their blood relatives, and they don't need to be told this. So we have the so-called true version, the exact opposite meaning, although if you were going to take this literally, it means battle bonds make you closer than brothers. Blood is thicker than water is often misattributed to the Bible. It actually originated in 12th century Germany. The blood of the covenant interpretation originates in 1994 on a webpage with no source. Shocking. Of all the so-called incorrectly used idioms I've covered in this video, this one might be the most baffling. Blood has been a shorthand for familial relation for thousands of years. Why would you say blood is thicker than water in the context of family? And have blood be the one that doesn't mean family. This one puts me in a real position because just like My Country Right or Wrong, I don't agree with the short phrase. I don't think that familial relations should come before everything. But I'm frustrated at the idea of framing the commonly known phrase, however incorrect or disagreeable, as ingenuine or bastardized. There's a weird thing about this phenomenon. It's so prevalent, so common, and we're not just talking about a common misconception, it's a misconception that is easily disprovable, but a lot of people are willing to internalize it without fact-checking. Most of the so-called full versions of Proverbs aren't even particularly convincing. Why would a line be created with a comeback built in? Why would the full, real, original version be arguing with itself? Why would an axiom mean the opposite of what it seems to? I want to say why. Why are all these things that started out as quips riffing off popular phrases now being passed around as the real truth? Do you think Spaceballs was the original Star Wars too? But I think I know why. And I mean that in more than one way. On the most literal level, the actual root is likely a specific 2014 Tumblr post where several people commented these quote-unquote full versions. It has close to 2 million notes. For those not familiar with Tumblr, 50k is big, 100k is huge. This is 2 million. Are you grasping the scale here? Look at this graph. It got reposted to other sites, and a regiment of listicles started marching out soon after. And surely there's a conversation in there about the BuzzFeed-style cannibalizing of random social media posts for profit, but staying on track here. Unfortunately, Tumblr is and was, especially around that era, a breeding ground for that type of parasite. Anyone remember Infinite Chocolate? I don't want to mock anybody for falling prey to deception, but it is unfortunate how easy it is to garner belief for claims that should be blatantly outlandish. So why aren't we fact-checking? I think the answer might be, at least in part, that it's more convenient not to. The same way you don't ask a question when you're scared of the answer, you might not fact-check something you want to be true. But why want it to be true? Could be several reasons. The simplest is the nitpicking sensibility. You can see it a lot in the more minute disputes that I didn't bring up here. Power tends to corrupt. Let them eat brioche. No, I am your father. I didn't discuss these examples because they're hair-splitting. They don't matter. Purism about the word choice says nothing about the phrase. It's a flag of knowledge without understanding or application. Great, you know which order the words go in. Now what? And I mean, 2 of the original quotes we looked at actually were the originals, but both still lacked meaningful context. It lends itself to the gotcha effect, because that's what these full versions are. They're gotchas, they're witty comebacks to well-worn phrases. All those listicles are called things like 10 phrases you've been getting completely wrong. Memorizing the full versions is ammunition. It gives you something to fire off and feel superior for a second. Wait for someone to say the quote-unquote wrong version so you can go, well, actually. It's chasing the high of proving somebody wrong, but it's not actually proving somebody wrong at all. For some reason, it's not sufficient to disagree with a common adage. You have to say you've got the real version. And well, everyone hits an age where they realize how much they'd never known, and that can mean grasping the scope of the gaps in your education. Maybe you've been fed a patriotic version of history that rhythmically elides assorted atrocities. Maybe you discover that your entire stance on an important matter was built on a false pretense. It's critical to unlearn some things, and while you're in that metamorphosis, it's easy to be eager for more mandrakes of misinformation to drag out of yourself. But if you get too eager, you might start pulling out everything, absorb any nice sounding narrative without question. In an extreme case, it speaks to treating the world almost like a story, the certainty that there's a happy ending, that there's always a fundamental justice under the surface, and you'll see it reflecting your face if you can just scrape the rust off. And even within discussion of stories, I often see that flavor of idealism compressing narratives into a more digestible boundary. This type of thinking is everywhere, even in more serious subjects, like opposing certain conservative Christian takes by combing the Bible for a comeback. Sure, you can grapple the text until it says it doesn't condemn gay people, but what's the point? Why fight the semantics without touching the actual idea? Like, okay, you're gonna make the case that the Bible doesn't forbid abortion, but let's take a step back. When we're talking about the practical reality of why abortion shouldn't be criminalized, the Bible's stance on the matter shouldn't even be in the top 10 talking points. It just speaks to how, if you really want to, you can make anything mean whatever you want it to mean. On that note, across that original Tumblr post, there's a bevy of comments suggesting that the original versions of the phrases have been deliberately and systematically buried for the sake of suppressing certain ideas. The notion is that the full versions reflect more counterculture beliefs, ideas more dangerous to the status quo, and the bastardized versions promote conformity. Is that true? My Country Right or Wrong and Blood is Thicker Than Water are the only good examples because the short phrases are very easy to disagree with. But Was a random figure of speech ever going to be the truth of the masses, the slogan of the underdog? The credibility of most of these claims flies out the window with a Google search, and shouldn't this be stomping it into the ground? There are real examples in the world of facts being buried, of narratives being controlled, but the idea that a broad range of idioms, items that exist only in the collective linguistic landscape, have been deliberately cut in half implies a conspiracy of profligate scale. And to what end? Even if there is regressive messaging in some of these phrases, or even all of them, does an adage have the power to shape your life? Before considering your college applications, are you gonna stop and go, wait, but ignorance is bliss? There's also a desire to validate whichever version you prefer as the correct one, but you don't need to make it so that one version is objectively correct to have a preference. On the rare occasions where I've seen a full version's proponent acknowledge that the extended idioms aren't the originals, the general reply is something like, well, meanings change over time. And sure, semantic creep is a very real phenomenon. Radical is its own opposite. Uninterested and disinterested switched definitions 200 years ago. You could start making a case there if you want to. What is a real version anyway? Who says the original has to be the real version? Well, for one, a comeback or counterpoint cropping up does not constitute an actual shift in a term. And more to the point, the case has never been, here's what these idioms should be, or here's what these idioms have become. It's, here's what these idioms always were. And you never knew, you big dummy. The appeal is to authenticity and nascence, not growth, to conservation, not progress. If we fight for this, we're appealing to a return to correctness. Everything was right back then. Let's go back to how it was. And I hope we're not bringing that attitude to every matter. That appeal to return is at odds with the idea of linguistic growth. Why is it that when you think your preferred version is the original, it's we should go back to the original, the true meaning is located in the original form, and when your preferred version is the new one, it's, well, we should accept the way it is now? It's almost as if there's something wrong with making reductive sweeping statements on multifaceted topics. Do you need to be reverting to the correct version to reform something, or should you be looking forward rather than backward? Should you say why the original draft of the Constitution clearly demonstrates such and such, or should you ask whether it might be wrong? There's a difference in perspective between trying to progress, trying to push things forward, and trying to conserve or restore. An extreme example is the tendency of right-wingers to pick an arbitrary point in time and say all progressions in civil rights up to this point were necessary, everything beyond is superfluous. I'm not saying that believing in the full versions is inherently right-wing, but I am saying that it likely reflects a mode of thinking that's not equipped to counter right-wing talking points, and a general willingness to accept falsehoods that you find convenient. Defeating a phrase is so much easier than defeating the idea behind it. If your mom tells you blood is thicker than water and you say, well, that line actually means the opposite of what you think, did you actually change her mind? Did you really challenge her way of thinking? Idioms don't have some intrinsic magic. They are tools for communicating ideas. When someone says blood is thicker than water, you can whip out your so-called real version all you want, but you're not gonna change what they meant when they said it. The full version's attitude relies on the idea that idioms have a fundamental truth, that they are totems that prescribe ontological facts to the ideas they're used for, that by contradicting the phrase, you'll contradict the belief, when idioms are really just patterns for expressing beliefs. So what do I want? I want cultural artifacts to not be reified like this. If you don't like something that is prevalent, that doesn't always mean that there must be a better form of it hiding inside. I want us to stop trying to fight an idiom with itself and start saying that the idiom is wrong. You don't need to reclaim blood is thicker, you can just disagree. I want us to acknowledge that we are constantly growing and changing, both individually and collectively, and that reverting to an earlier or more authentic version of ourselves is not a good thing by default. And perhaps most importantly, I want us to fact check. Look for the sources, verify a claim before you spread it, don't be afraid of questioning things. A random post or an unsourced listicle is never going to be enough proof. Look beyond it, see where it got its information, if anywhere. Thanks for hearing me out. Oh my god, I completely forgot. There's 5 more idioms with totally real full versions that I didn't even address in the video. I'll go through them real quick. All that glitters is not gold, but if it shines, it's definitely gold. A journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step, but I don't have running shoes. Laughter is the best medicine, other than morphine. Out of sight, out of mind, until you're attacked by the demon mime. And finally, honesty is the best policy. Not.